All righty then. Craig Martelle here, coming to you live from Alex's house downtown, where we have high-speed internet. And today's guest on the CNM show is John Truby. John, where are you coming to us from?
I'm coming from Los Angeles.
Oh, hiya, hiya.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to the show. We're here to talk about John's new book, Genres. I think we first talked about it in 2018, maybe 2019.
Yeah, absolutely right. I've been writing this for 5 years. It's massive, and you get a real sense of the scope of this book when you look at the full title with the subtitle. It's The Anatomy of Genres: How Story Forms Explain the Way the World Works. So we're not shy on ambition here, but to cover all the major genres, 14 major genres from which 99% of stories in the world come from, it really required a massive amount of information to impart to the reader, because the idea was that each genre, the information would be techniques to allow somebody to write and succeed at the professional level. So it really had to be very high level stuff.
Well, it's a follow-on to your The Anatomy of Story, which is one of the seminal works in the industry for writing, because it goes into the foundational elements of what make for a great story.
Yep. It was intended that way, Craig. It was The Anatomy of Story came out in 2008, and it was based on a course that I have done for over 30 years called The Anatomy of Story, that has had over 50,000 writers take that course. But just over the last 10 years, since The Anatomy of Story came out, I've really become obsessed with how I can help writers get to the very top. And for me, that means writing a great book, and it means making it a bestseller. Now, obviously, that's very hard to do, because what you're talking about is getting into the top 1% of writers working in the world. And a lot of times when I talk to writers, for example, at the show, and I say, this is what I do, this is what I'm about. They say, oh, I know all about story. They say, well, I use 3X structure, I use Hero's Journey or Save the Cat. And they think that's all they need. And here's the problem, and believe me, I'm not happy to have to tell them that, but the problem is those books are really good for beginners, but they have very few practical story techniques, and certainly very few at the professional level, much less being able to use them to write a bestseller. So, again, we're not just talking about writing a book that we can publish. We're talking about writing a great book that can be a bestseller. And when I wrote The Anatomy of Story, the idea was to include all the professional story techniques a writer would need to write a best-selling novel. But the one subject it does not cover, and which has now become, really over the last 20 years, it's become the key to writing a best-selling novel or a hit film, is how do you write the different genres that make up 99% of popular stories? And I believe that if you want to succeed at the professional level, you have to write the stories that the business, by that I mean the publishers, the studios, and most especially, of course, the readers, that those people want to buy. And that means learning how to master the structure of the genres that you are writing. And that means, first and foremost, which is what the first half of every chapter in the book is about, is mastering the 15 to 20 special plot beats that are unique to that form. And if you don't know them, and if you don't hit every one of them, you have no chance of getting to the top.
I remember when I was talking to you back at the in Samstown in 2019, and you talked about I think 24 separate plots within a single story, a plot and the subplot and the side plots, driving that story forward in order to engage the readers and or watchers and keep them moving forward. I I always remembered that, and I always make sure that I have, well, anywhere from 12 to 24 different threads within that story, riding that main backbone towards from the start to the end.
Well, you've hit on a crucial part of writing a best-selling novel, and that is mixing genres. In the very first chapter of the book, I talk about there are 3 unwritten rules by which the entire entertainment business works. And by that, of course, I mean novels, films, television. And they all have to go by these 3 rules. The first is that it is a genre world. The entertainment business buys and sells genres, and we can see that just looking on Amazon. But the second rule is, which you just touched on, is to be really successful as a popular storyteller, you want to combine anywhere from 2 to 4 genres. And that's because over the last 20 to 30 years, there's been a major increase in plot density in every story medium. And this is driven by the marketing people. It used to be you get away with a single genre story, for example, a horror story. No more. Because what the marketing people are saying is, we want to give them 2 for the price of 1. We want to give them 3. We want to give them 4 for the price of 1, right? And there's a very good reason why they're doing that. And it's based on a problem, which is that, I talked about getting into the top 1% of writers. Well, what separates the top 1% of writers from everyone else is the ability to construct complex plot. At the same time, there's this reality. There are more techniques that go into plot than all the other major writing skills combined. And the problem is that most writers have no idea what those techniques are, and certainly not at the professional level. So what happens is that most writers figure out, I'll figure out the plot as I go. Why? Because they don't have the techniques that can allow them to construct a complex plot from the very beginning. Well, of course, 99 out of 100 times, they don't figure it out as they go, at least not one that's on the professional level with that kind of complexity that the marketing people require. So the first reason that you want to use genres is that they are plot systems that have already been worked out. And the plot complexity is already been put into that system. And all you have to do is learn it well enough to tap into it, and then you can use it. And the reason you want to mix genres and not just do one of those is that when you mix genres, you double or triple the plot. This is the great secret of genres and why it is so crucial that whatever genres you're working in, first of all, make sure your story is anywhere from 2 to 4, and make sure you know the plot beats of every one of those genres.
I like it. And I think that also goes to why science fiction romance has become as huge a genre as it is.
Yep. One of the keys I talk about in the book to really standing out from the crowd, separating yourself from the crowd, and I talk about this in the second half of each chapter, which is the way you do it, you can't just mix 2 to 4 genres. You have to, what's known as transcend the genre. You have to do something more than what is in that genre. In other words, if you just hit the beats of your genres, you're doing what everybody else who is at least trying to write professionally is doing, right? That's just step 1. Now you have to figure out, how am I going to step out above everybody else who's writing in my genre? And the way that you do it is you transcend. And there's different ways that you do that. One way is that you execute each beat in a way that is different than anybody else has ever done it. A second way you do it is that you mix genres, or you play with the order of the beats that are in the genre. Another way that you do it is you mix genres that are not normally put together. So, for example, to use your science fiction reference, Inception, hugely popular film. one of the main reasons it was so popular was because it combined two genres that are never put together, which is science fiction and heist. It's a science fiction heist story. Audience never seen that before. So, they were the only people in the category. They were only people in that area of storytelling. And of course, they executed it really well. But science fiction romance is another example of that. Science fiction romance, if you think about it just from an abstract level, are on almost opposite ends of the genre spectrum. So putting them together, again, gives the audience something they haven't seen before, and it gives them two very unique pleasures, the pleasures that come with science fiction, which are very different than the pleasures that come with romance. By putting them together, it's like having your cake and eating it too. And this is what we're always looking at when we're mixing genres.
I've talked for a long time that genre equals marketing. Genres didn't exist until the marketers got a hold of it and said, well, hey, we've got a bunch of people that read this stuff, so we're just going to call that X, and then we'll market to them these other X type items that we then obtain. And that's traditional publishing. They had the market, and then they got the books that would feed that market. Yep. So this, hey, I didn't pass the gatekeepers. Well, you didn't have a book that fed their predetermined market. So genre equals marketing. Now Amazon, with their some 14,000 different categories, have made those more available. However, like you, 14 feed 99%. I tell everybody, go for the absolute biggest genre pool you can find that has readers that will most likely like your book. And if you go for the sub niche, well, great. If you tap 100% of that market, you might get 84 readers. Well, good. And you can own it, 84 readers, but it's not going to be, like you said, pro level, making full-time money and worth your time. Because when you commit to write a book, whether it's 1 month or 1 year to write that book, this is all time you've committed. And if you've sold to 100% of the readers and there's only 84, you're doing yourself and your family a disservice when, with little tweaks, probably you can get into that next genre up, which might be 10,000 or 100,000 readers. And you give yourself an opportunity to not just win, but win big by doing the genre right. So what kind of genre breakout do you recommend? Like 50% in your backbone, the main genre, and then some variation underneath that?
That's a great question because it's crucial to executing the strategy of mixing genres. Many writers understand the importance, marketing-wise, of mixing genres, but they don't know how to do it. And so what they end up with is story chaos. Why? Because each genre has with it a predetermined hero, a predetermined main opponent, predetermined desire line for that character in terms of getting their goal at the end of the story, and predetermined set story beats anywhere from 15 to 20. So when you mix them and you don't know what you're doing, the reason you get story chaos is you have too many heroes, you have too many opponents, you have too many desire lines, which gives you too many story spines, and then you have all of these plot beats from the different genres that you have no idea how to put together. And so here's the trick. The trick is you've got to choose one of those genres to be the primary genre. And that's going to be your spine. That's going to be the backbone that you're going to layer everything else on top of that. And what you do then is once you've determined what my primary genre is, that tells you who your hero is, who the main opponent is, and probably a number of secondary opponents. It tells you the desire line of that character in the story. And it gives you the primary beats that must be in your story. Right? Now, then what you do is you take the other genres and you look at the plot beats of those other genres. Where they work with the main genre plot beats, add them. If they don't work with it, because a lot of people don't realize this, plot beats of one genre can be polar opposites of the plot beats of another one. And this is another reason why you get story chaos. So what you do is you grab the plot beats from the other genres and apply them, but only when they work to support the main form. This brings up another key point for your writers in terms of both writing and marketing their story, which is we want to write the story with multiple genres in mind, but we want to market the story with only one. Because the category, Amazon, your readers, and so on, they need to know, so they're not confused. They need to know, well, what category are we in here? So you tell them the category of that main genre, which, as you say, also includes thousands and thousands of possible readers as opposed to 82. So that gives you your main genre, that gives you the way that you market it, that gives the way Amazon can market it. But in your mind, because you're the person who is making the sausage behind the scenes, you know that you're actually mixing multiple genres so you can get maximum plot for your reader.
So let me ask you a really hard question. And this is for the same question you ask all parents. Which child is your favorite? So which genre is your favorite, John?
That's a great question. In writing this book, taking 5 years to write these 14 genres, it really is like your kids. I mean, you love them all. I will admit to you that horror is not my favorite, but when writing about it and seeing it, the real potential of a great horror story, I mean, I just have I've gained such great love and respect for it. But so I love them all, but it's interesting that if I had to really focus it down to the one genre that I love the most, it would be the anti-Western, believe it or not. And the anti-Western is the way you transcend the Western. And the Western, of course, was the most popular story for about 100 years in American culture. It was because it's America's creation myth. And, it's about the rise of the American dream. And that's incredibly exhilarating to see. And if you were brought up on Westerns, as I was, because I'm older than you are,
just a little,
just a little bit maybe. But if you were brought up on that at a time when, half of what was on television was Westerns.
Yeah.
And I watched all of them. Okay. Now, the problem is that the Western in its classic form has really gone in decline. And what happened was it's because it wasn't showing the America that we all really live in, because we're past the 1800s, and that whole rise of the nation has already happened for a long time. And so what you get when you kick the Western up to its highest form of art is the anti-Western. And you get things like Butch Cassidy and The Wild Bunch and Once Upon a Time in the West and McCabe and Mrs. Miller. These are interesting. These 4 films, the greatest of all anti-Westerns, all came out within 3 years. And there's no other genre has had that kind of creative spurt in that short a period of time. But I love the anti-Western. I love those anti-Western films because this element of not only grandeur that you get with the Western, but sadness that it's gone. Now, of course, it's not gone. And as you know, the Western just moved to outer space. And now it is in outer space, once again, one of the most popular of all subgenres.
As I have to admit that I wrote a space Western because I loved Firefly, which is one of the premier space Westerns that came out. And we're in season 2, but I wrote with Scott Moon, Dark Landing, which is a sheriff in space, and Wild West within a saloon. And I love that the whole ability to shape a future culture based on taming the wilds of a new planet.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of the Western is it takes you back into a stage of a society when it's just starting. And so what outer space allows you to do is recreate that time in American life when we were just putting the nation together and everything's crazy and there's no laws. You know, you've got this one character who is defending society and is defending the law. And that's great stuff. But the only place you can do it is in outer space.
Yep, just the opportunity. So the anti-Western, I would have never guessed that, but because I thought you were a thriller guy, and I tell you what, I look forward each year to your prognostications when it comes to the Oscar awards.
Yep.
And you won, I think 2 years ago. You predicted, and it won, and you were surprised because it was the first foreign film.
Well, it's funny, Craig, because I love doing that. It's my countdown, my Oscar countdown, where I go from, let's call it least favorite to most favorite. And I can be a little scathing when it comes to the least favorites. But usually what I do is I say, these are what I think are the best written films. But that's different usually from what's going to win. And it turned out that year, Parasite was, in my opinion, the best written film, and it won. And so I was overjoyed by the fact that they actually, awarded something for its excellence of storytelling, and which they don't always do.
I'm happy to see that, because the quality of storytelling, and especially even something like sitcoms. I especially watch, I watch Big Bang all the time. If we see it on, we'll turn it on while we're doing other stuff. And Big Bang is so well written year after year, and made geek culture. So crossing genres, it made geek culture mainstream and made it okay and changed a generation. And then we had Stranger Things add into that, and horror elements. Oh, by the way, but it's science fiction. Oh, but it's not. But it's contemporary fantasy, and all these elements work together. And once again, huge winner. Well written, though.
Yeah, it's you're absolutely right. Big Bang is one of the most beautifully constructed sitcoms in years, and of course, it ran forever because which is really hard to do, because sustaining new story for the same characters over that many years, really, really hard to do. But that's the kind of excellence that they had. Stranger Things, perfect example of what you get when you combine genres, you mix genres, especially those particular genres, which are super popular. And of course, they do it beautifully. You get Squid Game, which combines science fiction with thriller. Hugely popular.
That was some crazy stuff there, though. Squid Game was crazy.
Crazy stuff. But you see the power of mixing genres, because this is a show from South Korea. 5 years ago, it would be unheard of that a South Korean show would actually be played on American television, obviously through streaming, that they would actually even play it, because there was always this conventional wisdom. Oh no, nobody will read subtitles. You got to at least dub it. But even then, you're not getting something from South Korea. And so what they find out is, what is it, 150 million people worldwide have seen it, if not more. That is the power of genres, and that's the power of mixing genres and doing it in a way where you know what you're doing, and that's a perfect example. They know what their primary genre is, but they're bringing other elements in as well.
In 20 Books of 50K, I deal with a lot of newer authors, and almost all of them say, well, I write cross-genre. Well, good for you. However, and what your book will help them understand is the backbone genre. That's the one. And you describe the tropes within that and that's one of the things where people might mix genres, but they might jump tropes and now lose the main storyline. And like you said, what did you call it? Story chaos.
Yes, exactly. Well, you brought up a term that is really important, because it's the source of one of the biggest misconceptions that writers have in writing genre stories. Everybody thinks about, oh, well, I'm going to grab these tropes that I love, and I'm going to put them together in a story, and grab them from different genres and so on, and I'll have a really good story. No, you've just set yourself to story death when you do that, because You have to understand, these writers have to understand the essential difference between a trope and a genre. A trope is an individual story unit. A genre is a sequence of tropes that have been sequenced very carefully in order to build the story from beginning through middle to end. If you just grab different tropes, you will have no story build. You will not have an overarching plot. You'll just have different moments. And especially if you're grabbing these tropes from different genres, you'll just have a mess and nobody will know what the hell kind of story is this. So that's why I always tell writers, learn the genre, learn the 15 to 20 plot beats that have already been worked out and already been sequenced. Now, having said that, you want to learn those beats and that sequence so well that you can then change it, because that's another way. We're talking earlier about different ways that you transcend the genre to separate yourself from everybody else writing in your form. And the other way that you do it is that you change the order of these beats, because what that order is, the reader who is familiar with that genre, they know what that order is. And they like the order, but it's predictable, right? And so when you change the order of those beats, then all of a sudden you short circuit their expectations and they go, whoa, I've never seen that before. And so they get, again, have your cake and eat it too. They get the pleasure of the genre that they love, but they also get to see it done in a different way. But you're still dealing with a sequence of beats, a sequence of tropes that are designed to give you the overall effect as opposed to individual moments.
I think one of the most important elements here is, like you said, you had to know the sequence of tropes before you deviate.
Right.
You can't deviate first. And that's with your book, with being well read in a genre, you might inherently know what those tropes are and the sequence that they need to happen. But I'd say you have to write it traditionally first and practice before then you could say, now we can do these deviations. We can dive off track and pull the reader along on a great journey. And that the challenge is you have to know it first. And too many people have like the good ideas and they want to insert all these good ideas they had before they started writing into their first book. And I would caution people and encourage you to narrow you to one topic and then go along that.
Yeah. And it's so important because I always tell writers, you're not competing against all other writers. You're competing against the writers in your genre. And so that means you got to know your genre better than anybody else. You've got to know that form cold. Part of knowing that form cold is knowing what the beats are, what the sequence is, and so on, so that you know that when you make deviations in it, you're not going to screw it up. In other words, there's good deviations and there's bad deviations in the sense that those beats are in that sequence for a reason. It's because that is the most dramatic way to tell that story. For example, if you're doing a love story about the love between two people, the love story over decades and really even centuries has evolved to express that the most powerful and most audience-pleasing way. So if you're going to play with that, deviate from that sequence, you are in danger of not telling the most dramatic story. So that's why you've got to learn that form so well that you know that if I move this beat from here to here, it's not going to screw up the overall build.
I like it. In science fiction, there are so many subgenres, and I suspect that goes for mystery, thriller, all of that. How do you address that in your book? And I have not seen a copy of your book, but we'll rectify that fairly soon.
What I do in the book is I talk about at the very beginning of the chapter the basic idea of how that genre works. Then I talk about what is the underlying theme that it's really expressing, because this is yet another way that you transcend the form as you express the deeper theme, which most writers don't do. It's one of the biggest mistakes they make. And I also, at the beginning, list a number, by no means not all of them, a number of subgenres. And these are typically, some of them are found on Amazon, some of them are not. But the point is, it's essential to know that whatever genre you're writing in, there are massive numbers of subgenres. And what are they basically? Basically, what they are is different mixes. There's science fiction with Western, right? There's science fiction with action. There's science fiction with thriller. There's science fiction with romance, right? So you're basically taking the 14 major forms and you are combining them in various patterns. And again, you start to see how many subgenres there can be when you think about that idea of you want to mix anywhere from 2 to 4 genres. Well, you mix in 4 genres, you're pulling in beats from all over the place. So what I do is I go through, in the chapter, I go through the beats, the 15 to 20 plot beats that are in the main form. And then typically what I do in the second half of the chapter, when I talk about the deeper theme of the form, I talk about how do you transcend it. And usually transcending comes from mixing that main genre with 1 or 2 other ones, because those have been found to produce the most powerful, the most advanced, the deepest stories in that form. So for example, in the very first chapter on horror, I talk about combining the 2 main ways you transcend the horror form and kick it to a higher level is you mix it with horror with science fiction, or you mix it horror with myth. Each produces a different major story form. Both are extremely highly respected, both critically, and they are extremely popular as well. So, and then in that section of the chapter, I'll go through how do you write those combination genres.
Okay. So what you're saying is you are the CRISPR of genres. CRISPR being the gene editing software.
Exactly. It's and I really wanted this to be a manual to say, genres are so massive, they're so confusing, and they're so deep. I wanted to give writers everywhere a single place to go that has professional level techniques and beats for all of the major genres and in combination. And so it's like soup to nuts. It's like there's this one place to go. And what I predict that most writers will do when they get the book is they're not going to read it from beginning to end. They're going to go to their chapters. They're going to go to the genres that they write. But they're also going to have those other chapters, those other genres, because they may, next year, they may come up with a story idea that doesn't involve those genres that they've been writing. It involves some other genres. And then the book is there to help them and show them exactly how you would write it.
The phrase soup to nuts is one my father-in-law used to use. So once again, you are showing your age. And it's in the old days, fabulously extravagant meals would start off with soup, and the very last course would be a handful of nuts, like walnuts, hazelnuts, something like that.
Craig, I've never known the source of that line. Thank you so much. I never knew where it came from, and now I know.
Yeah, it's like the full 9 yards.
Yeah.
When you got dressed up for a suit, everything together took 9 yards of fabric. So when you say full 9 yard, that's the whole 9 yards. It's not a football reference.
I thought it was a football reference.
It's a clothing reference. Yeah. The full 9 yards. I had a question in there. Romance.
Yeah.
You did a lot of studying. I suggest that sweet romance and steamy romance probably have 95% overlap on their plots, on their plot devices.
Absolutely right. And again, because what we're looking for in these genres is the most dramatic way to tell that particular subject. And so whether the degree to which there's steaminess in that romance doesn't have to do with the overall sequence of beats. It has to do with the detailing in terms of the texture of how that romance builds. And some writers, and this has always been somewhat controversial in romance, is some writers would claim that if you get into these steamy sex scenes, it actually hurts the feeling of romance, the romantic quality of the story. And there is some justification for that belief. I don't believe that it necessarily is true. I believe that if you want to get the steamy scenes in there, it doesn't necessarily have to kill the romance. In fact, it can actually increase it.
I think the readership votes with their money, and they say that both have a huge, huge audience and are well received when well written. And whether it's steamy because people want to see something beyond fade to black, what does this really mean? And then others just like are happy with the fade to black. They feel the emotion. People want the emotion as well as the dopamine hit of that of seeing it, not voyeurdom, but becoming more of a participant in the story.
Yeah. And one of the things I do in every chapter is I talk about from the very beginning, I say, most people think of this genre as this, but in fact, what it's really about is that. Because until you get to that deeper element of what it's really talking about, you're not getting to the deeper element that pleases the audience. And, so I make the major distinction at the very beginning is, you got to have those 15 to 20 plot beats in that form. But that's just the start. That's not why the reader comes back to that form book after book after book, because they know what those plot beats are. Yes, you have to have them. I always say if you're writing a romance and you don't have the first dance, your romance readers are going to be pretty pissed off at you, right? So you got to have those beats. But you got to know what it's really about. What it's really about are the deeper themes, the values. And in fact, I talk in the book extensively about each genre expresses a deeper life philosophy for how to live a good life. And it's that life philosophy that brings the reader back again and again. So if you're not tapping into that, if you're not expressing that, then you're missing easily half of your readers. So for example, in romance, we think is all about the building emotion between two people as they fall in love. And obviously that is very important. But what it's really about, it's about learning how to love. It's learning what I call the moral act of loving another person. And in a really good love story, that comes from each character learning how to overcome their own selfishness and learning to sacrifice so that each can get what they want in this life, but they also learn that we'll get much more by doing it together. And so each of these genres has that deeper element of what are the values that you're expressing in this story form, because it's those values that the reader comes back to again and again. One last quick point about romance to give you an example of here's what people think it's about, what's really at stake, what's really happening. You talked about the romance or the steamy sex scenes and so on. Far more important than either of those in a good romance is the dialogue, the talk. The dialogue is more important in romance than any other genre. And if it's good talk, readers love that more than any scene that you could write, about those two people, because the talk is the avenue to get inside each other's souls. And that's what the reader really wants to see. They want to see two people come together who are meant to be together, it would be a tragedy if they didn't get together, right? And the way you do that is through the dialogue.
Well, I tell you what, and anybody on this planet who thinks I am pillaring romance is grossly mistaken. Are you kidding? I have the greatest respect for the authors who dive into that field where about 70% of all book sales reside is
Yep.
in romance. So
Yep.
it's a huge market. It's highly competitive, even though I always say you only compete with yourself.
Yep.
But telling the same story, it's not the same. It's similar. It's the same, but different.
Yep.
And that difference is what makes it unique. And the moral aspect, the philosophical aspect of each genre, I think is something that people inherently know, but it's better if you can verbalize it like that. It's not
Yep.
that, hey, it's enemies to friends or
Right.
why choose or what any of the other types of things. Look at 50 Shades of Grey, 125 million copies sold.
Yep.
She did nothing wrong. Everybody should aspire to sell 125 million copies of a book, for
Absolutely.
Pete's sake. Good on E.L. James, good on the whole genre for expanding it and making those subgenres available to the world, because obviously the world was hungry for them. Once they satisfied an internal need that people had when they started reading and got embroiled in the story and stayed with the story.
Well, just to support exactly what you're saying, I couldn't agree with that more. In the book, I go through the 14 different genres, but I do them in a very specific order. I do it from the lowest, most basic life philosophy to the highest life philosophy. So I do it based on sequencing the themes and what is the wisdom that each one of these genres is expressing through the story that you as the writer need to tap into. At the very top is love story, romance. I have massive respect for the romance form. There are certain people who like to put it down. They are 100% wrong. There is no higher genre than the love story. Why? Because the love story gives us the recipe for day-to-day happiness. There is nothing more important than that. And that's why I say, if you write love stories, you are doing besides the fact that, you're giving people pleasure of reading your book, you're giving them very fundamental wisdom that can improve the way they live their life. And so be proud that you are writing that form, because it's a great form.
I include romance as one of my subgenres in almost every one of my other stories.
Wow.
I do not have any romance books, but my thriller, it has the love story in there. And I tell you what, let me bring back to a movie that I'm sure you're aware of, even though it's kind of considered a B movie, which is Kurt Russell's Soldier. Here he is. He's little more than a cyborg. However, and they trash him when they come up with a new cyborg to replace him, even though he wasn't, I don't think he had any cybernetics in him. And they dump him on a distant planet where settlers have taken up. And then the new cyborgs come in to take over that planet to find him. And he kills them all and saves it. And at the back end of all of it, it was a love story. It was about his love of life. And then he met a woman and his love of her and what he would do to save her and her family.
Well, this is one of the deeper themes of science fiction, which is that typically, especially in high-level science fiction, one of the things that it's about is who is most human. And what we do is obviously we contrast the machine, the cyborg, to the human characters in the story. And over the course of this story, Blade Runner is a perfect example of this. 2001 Space Odyssey, another perfect example of this. Over the course of the story, we find out that the machine is actually more human than the humans are, because of the way they act, the moral things, the moral choices they make, and typically the love that they express for somebody else that the humans have lost the ability to do. So, again, knowing what's really going on under the surface of your form and what the themes are really about is what allows you to mix genres most effectively and get the biggest audience.
Let's talk another genre the thriller genre. What are some of the key aspects in the thriller genre that keep the readers coming back?
The thriller genre is really a mix between detective and horror. And what that means is that there's a lot of, and I talk about in the book, in the second of the last chapter, which is on detective and thriller, I talk about some of the major differences. And why do I do that? Because these genres tend to be in different families, genre families. So, for example, in the speculative fiction category, we have science fiction, horror, and fantasy. In the crime family, we have crime, detective, thriller, and gangster. They're all part of that family, but which means they have certain similarities, but they have certain key differences. And the reason I mention that is because one of the biggest mistakes writers make is that when they come up with that idea, that story idea, which genre they choose to be their primary genre is a massive decision. If you choose the wrong one, you've blown the idea. You've ruined the idea. We don't want to do that. So this is especially dangerous when you're talking about choosing within a family. So that's why when I talk in detective and thriller chapter, I talk about what are the key differences between detective and thriller. And one of the key differences is typically the detective is a professional investigator, whereas in a thriller, they are not. They are the average citizen. They're just a regular person. And which means that during the investigation, we are rarely afraid for the detective, for their safety. We are very afraid in the thriller for their safety. And so, because first of all, they're not usually as competent physically or with a gun. They're an average person, so they're not a professional at investigating and so on and so forth. But part of the point of the thriller is to make the detective story more emotional. And we do that because detective is very heady. It's the most mind-oriented of all the forms. So with thriller, we get tremendous emotion in there because we're afraid for this person as they investigate. So one of the biggest challenges for the thriller writer is that there's two tracks that are going on here. You are investigating, but you are under attack. And so what you want to do, you want to continue to maintain the investigation going forward. In other words, being an active hero. At the same time, you are under assault, which tends to kick the hero back and make them passive. We want to keep the investigation going. Now, another thing that you have to do with thriller that makes it really one of the most powerful and popular forms in all mediums is that you have a investigation track that you want to track. That's the desire line. That's what the character wants. They want to solve that murder or solve that larger crime. Sometimes in political thrillers, it's a larger crime. But you also have to track the emotional development of the character. And this is what many writers don't do. And this is true in thriller. It's also true a lot in action. It can be true even in science fiction, where this larger goal that we're dealing with overcomes the internal development of our character. And when you do that, again, you lose a lot of your readers because they don't want to just see success of the goal. They want to see the success of that person growing as a human being. They want to see the character change. So one of the key techniques that you do in a great thriller is you connect the crime to the character's, the hero's emotional flaw. You connect the crime to the emotional flaw. And what that means is that the act of solving the crime should lead the character to solve their personal weakness. And dealing with their personal weakness should help them solve the crime. Now, what I just laid out is very tricky to do. But that's what separates you from everybody else. Is if you can do that, you're ahead of almost everybody else working in the form. Now, one other point, we're talking about mixing genres. thriller is the most common genre that it is mixed with to increase its popularity is the action form. And again, one of the reasons it works so well is because they're on opposite ends of the spectrum. Thriller is very tight, right? We're trapped in a box, whereas action is as big as the world. And so, so you're not dealing with, you're still probably dealing with an average citizen, but they're going to be involved in fighting, physical fighting, and they're going to have to learn if they're not already capable of doing it, they're going to have to learn how to do it. But it's just, again, it's the power of combining genres that you would not normally think of would go together, but that combination is dynamite.
I tell you what, I wrote my first thriller, and it wasn't a thriller. And then I wrote my second thriller series, and it wasn't a thriller either. And I learned and I marketed it properly. One was a more of an espionage thriller, and then the other one was I was getting slaughtered in the reviews, and I'm like, what the hell's wrong? Oh, genre equals marketing. I was marketing to the wrong genre, and then I put it in action adventure. It picked way up. Sales went way up, and everything, because now I have the right readership with the right expectation.
Yes.
And that's part of when you dive into a genre is dealing with the reader expectations appropriately, so you're not fighting yourself, trying to push a rope uphill as it may be.
Right. So it's the biggest mistake you can make as a writer in the genre world. If you are labeling it as one genre when it's actually another, then the readers of that genre who know that genre really well, they know it as well as you do. So it's like the example I gave in the love story, if you don't have the first dance. Well, if you have a thriller and you don't have the basic beats of the thriller that readership expects, they're going to say, hey, you wrote a shitty book. Right. That may not be the case at all. It's just, you didn't write the thriller. You wrote a really good action adventure.
Yep. As simple as that. Well, we've been on for 52 minutes. Where can we find Anatomy of Genres?
Easiest way to do it, Craig, is go to anatomyofgenres.com. It's just the title of the book, Anatomy of Genres, one word, and that's plural, anatomyofgenres.com. And there's there's a number of different stores there, links that you can click on, buy it from your favorite store, and you got it. And we're doing another thing, which is if you save your receipt and send in your receipt, then we're gonna give people a bonus. We're going to give them the choice of between two classes, my Avatar class or my Westworld class. And in these classes, I break down these two, what I consider to be masterpieces in their genres and in their medium. I break them down beat for beat, which not only shows you what the beats are of that genre, but it also shows an example of how a writer has executed those beats and also transcended the beats to do something really special. So again, anatomyofgenres.com, and then go to, once you've got the book and you want to get your bonus, just email us at, just go to truby.com and you'll find a place where you can contact us and send in your receipt.
And then get a free class. Doesn't get any better than that. Well, I really appreciate your time, John. We'll run this on November 29th. And any final words?
Only that it's been a great pleasure, as always, talking with you. I love when we talk story. Always a charge. I would simply say, invest in yourself as a writer. Deal with your writing as a professional, and I know it's the foundation of 20 books, and which is one of the things I love about that, is treat yourself as a professional, invest in yourself, learn the professional tools of the trade. That's what the book is for. It's $20. It couldn't be easier to buy. And I believe it will totally change how writers work their craft.
And I'll give a bunch of copies away when we launch this video into the group. And I'll tell you, you only need to do two things in this business: write a great story, put it in the right reader's hands. That's
Yep.
all you need to do. And you've got 2 books, a book that addresses each aspect of that. And there we are. All right. Thank you, John. Stay on track here.